All right. I see some people, at least two who already joined so far, based on the names in the chat widgets. Welcome, Tone and Yodi, and maybe others already. We are actually, I see we have more than just two people, so that's awesome. And I would say, let's kick it off right away. I'm going to hand over the screen to Tony, and then leave him to it, and I'll take over a bit in between the slides. So here we go.
Hello. Hi. Thank you, Erwin, for that intro. My name's Tony. I'm a web ecosystem consultant at Google. And as I'm sure you all know, we've got Erwin running this session today, who is the CTO at RUMvision. I work on the web ecosystem team at Google. We are kind of partner-facing arm of Chrome and web platform within Google. So we go out and talk to individual businesses and sometimes individual developers. We participate in open source communities and all sorts of things like that. And our goal is to try and bring the best of the web to developers and make it easier for developers to, bring the best of the web to their users. Today, we're going to be talking about Web Platform Baseline. If you've not heard of that before, or if you've heard of it, but you're not that sure what it is, don't worry. I'm going to explain what it is, recap what the standard is, why we've come up with it, how it's defined. Then Erwin's going to show us the really excellent tooling that exists in RUMvision now for figuring out to use Baseline in your teams. And then I will show you some of the tools that we've already got launched with other partners that you can use to fold Baseline into your decision-making and into your code authoring and deployment, and the other bits of the process, which is just the tip of the iceberg. We've got lots of other things, lots of other coals in the fire with lots of different tools, but just some of the things that have launched already this year. So, Erwin, anything you want to say before I jump in?
Well, maybe just the typical struggles that we as developers have. I'm a developer myself as well, and I do know there are some other developers in this live stream today. And I think the most common examples, maybe recent examples actually are, for example, loading lazy feature, the fetch priority attributes, WebP, that the typical discussions, should we already go to AVIF or is WebP sufficient for now, etc. I have to admit, I'm a performance consultant, so I chose 3 web features which are related to web performance, but there are more than thousands web features out there. So I hope this will, a lot of people will recognize this discussion. And I used to go to Can I Use, where Baseline is obviously trying to simplify decision-making. So
I think, if we had designers on this call, people who are sitting writing CSS every day, we'd get a whole bunch of other exciting APIs that people are curious to use, but maybe don't feel that confident using. CSS subgrid and the has selector, things like that are really, game changing for people who author code for the web all day, every day, but they're new, they're it's hard to know just where they are. So let's talk a little bit about why Baseline exists, why the W3C WebDX community groups. So as we've just been talking about, the environment that you work in as a developer is evolving. You're building native software, whether you're building web, the tools that are available to you in code, they change over time and they make new options available to you. And sometimes they take old options away, but there's usually a good reason. Platform providers are always trying to offer you new functionality or make things that used to be really complicated much simpler or more approachable. Something that used to take you 100 lines of code, we compress that stuff down. You think about fetch as an API for getting resources. It's so much cleaner and more simple than the old, XHTTP. A messy way of doing things has become a much cleaner way, and that's much more approachable for old developers and you. The web platform, unlike a lot of other software development environments, it evolves very organic. You look at, building native apps for mobile devices, writing code in Java or C++ or C. You have very clear defined versions where okay, these APIs work within this version and they don't work with that version. The web platform is a lot more fluid because there's lots of different browser vendors that are implementing stuff at different times. There might be things that are still, the spec is being written and there's experimental versions that are being worked on. And what that means is that web features come to different browsers at times, and that's hard to keep track of. Good news is browser vendors are collaborating, right? There's the interop process that happens every year now, where folks from Google, Microsoft, and Apple, and Mozilla, and a number of other folks who are working in the space get together and agree a shared set of priorities for what needs to work perfectly across all of these browsers in the coming year. And that's really exciting, but it's still very hard to keep up. There's stuff that doesn't happen within interop. Sometimes browser vendors will choose to chat with what other browser vendors have already launched outside of the scope of interop, or even keeping up with interop. Right? It takes 12 months for that to happen, and knowing what's launched when it's not immediately obvious. So the WebDX community group from the W3C got together and thought, wouldn't it be great if there was an easier way of communicating how widely supported a feature is, how available a feature is. And that is where Baseline, the idea of Baseline is, it's a new communication tool for browser vendors, web developers, web tools developers to understand how interoperable a feature is and how commonly supported it is, how long has it been interoperable, and how likely is it that an end user is going to have it on their device. It's an open initiative. It involves web developers, technical writers, product managers. Anyone can join the group. We have bi-weekly meetings. So if you want to join and actually chat to the people who are working on the resources that underpin this, please do. And there are different open source repositories that I'll mention later on that you can join as well. So what is Baseline? Let me explain what Baseline actually is. So first thing we need to define is what's called the core browser set. So there are 3 major browser engines that are implemented in almost widely used browsers globally. So that's Chrome and Edge, which both implement Chromium. There's Firefox, which implements Gecko, and Safari implements WebKit. So these are the 4 browsers that we've kind of used as the benchmark for is a feature, because pretty much every other browser out there is going to be using the engine of these browsers. Most of the time it's Chromium. Of course, if you're on an iOS device, regardless of what app you install, it's using WebKit underneath. And Gecko is used in some devices that are sold for cheap devices in some parts of the world that need it. So a web feature can have one of 3 statuses. If it's not yet supported across the core browser set, so those 4 browsers, 3 engines, then we describe it as having limited. That means some of your users are not going to be able to use this feature. When a feature does become supported across the core browser set, the day that happens, we describe it as newly available. And you'll see in some of the documentation that I'll mention later on, if you MDN, for example, you'll see that blue tick. You'll see people are starting to use those on developer blocks and things like that as well. There's a widget where you pass in a feature key and it will give you the blue tick if it's newly available. And then 30 months after a feature becomes newly available, we start describing it as widely available. There's quite a lot of research done about 1.5 years ago to look at how long does it take for a feature for all the browser versions that support that feature to kind of get out to end users, whether that's browsers that are downstream Chromium or people updating their browsers, especially Safari, where it's tied to OS version for iOS and for macOS. Roughly how long does it take for sort of somewhere north of 90% of users to have it? And it's going to vary from feature to feature, depending on who's implemented it and where. But something like 30 months is a pretty good benchmark for most developers. That said, it may be that you look at the data for your user base and you find that actually some of them are on browsers that are older than that threshold, that they're on browsers that don't necessarily reliably support widely available, and maybe you need to draw the line earlier in terms of what you can safely use, you need to use a little more circumspectly. So we also talk about baseline yearly feature sets. I realize this slide is extremely densely packed. I'm not expecting you to read every single line or every single feature that's listed out there. It's more to illustrate that every year, lots of new features come. You can see on 2020, I think everyone was stuck at home. So there was a lot of stuff launched that year. That's why there's and many more involved, because I couldn't fit it physically without it just becoming a sort of gray blur. But we talk about baseline yearly feature sets. So anything that was newly available at the end of a given calendar year, we describe it being part of a feature set. So think of this as feature versioning for the web, in the same way that you would say, oh, okay, well, I know this API is available in iOS 14. It's not available in iOS 13. In the same way that you might say, oh, Java 12 and Java 13. Java 13 has these features that 12 doesn't. This is the same thing. It's all the stuff that launched, finally came available finally across those 4 browsers. So why is that useful? We're fairly confident that this is going to simplify organization or decision making for most developer teams. We know from conversations with front-end teams at large businesses and small and independent developers, agencies, whoever it might be, that the conversation around can we use this web feature or not is frequently boring and tortuous and takes a long time to come to decisions. So we want to make it easier. We need to be able to say, okay, well, our user base is for this particular baseline target, whether it's widely available in the year. We can use that. We need to be more careful the other. It also makes it easier if you're working at an agency and you're delivering for system integrators, something like that. If you're trying to communicate with partners, what browser versions do you support, or what features can you or can't you use for the sites that you're building? What do you need to polyfill or progressively enhance? This could be a really clean way to do that. Instead of having to say, oh, well, okay, well, we support Safari 15.6 and Chrome 1.0. You don't have to do that anymore. You can just say, okay, browsers that fit within baseline, support the baseline 2020 features that are supported, browsers that don't. It's easier for you as an end developer, someone who is sitting down and writing code day to day, to tell at a glance when you just page on MDN or can I use, or wherever you might be, you're reading a blog post, if someone put that widget in, you can just tell. You could say, oh, okay, this is going to work well for my users, or maybe I need to think a little bit harder about how I approach this. It helps you to remove unnecessary polyfills, progressive enhancements, or legacy workarounds that you might have been using. We'll look a little bit later on at what this looks like in tools that you use in your IDE. But a lot of folks are either continuing to use old polyfills that they don't need to, a sense of inertia, because it's technical debt to go in and remove those things, or because they're using defaults perhaps in a tool that are actually quite far in the past, and your user base does not need you to polyfill those things anymore. So there's a really big opportunity there to shave off a lot of unnecessary code and therefore make your site smaller from code footprint point of view, which means take it down the wire, serving costs, better performance. There's, the positive consequences of that are great. And also it can simplify your tooling set. So instead of having to have, a long list of browsers in your Browserslist config, or maybe you use a query that's dynamic, but it's not that clear what it actually means, and it's constantly changing. It could be easier with that, because you could just say, we support baseline widely available. It's very easy to tell what that means in terms of features. Big baseline 2020. So with all that in mind, we know that picking features can be easy. But the goal of baseline is not necessarily to discourage you from using new web features. The goal is also to make it easy to understand what you can use out of the box with no workarounds, but also what you might be able to adopt with a little bit of extra work as a progressive enhancement, or maybe with a polyfill for the users that need it, if you want to set some kind of feature detection, loading, something like that. Now, to make that kind of decision, if you want to start looking at, what's the newer stuff that we might be able to use in a limited way, or what's the older stuff that we can use safely, you need data to do that. You need to be able to look at your user base and understand which baseline versions are appropriate. If we say our threshold is 1% of users, 99% of users will be supported fully. For the other 1%, we'll show them an error message or something. You need that data about your site. We've got some, we did some work with the RUM archive team last year, and they've done a kind of global view of what baseline support looks like, but that's only really good for greenfield development. And if you want to do this for your site, then you need a tool that can do it. So Erwin is going to show you what that looks like.
Yeah, I'll try, because we were in an interesting position, you could say, because, well, first of all, we are a RUM tool, a reuse monitoring tool, meaning we collect data. If a site adds a snippet to their website, obviously, we collect data about the visitors, which also contains browser-related data. And I'm still a developer myself as well. So a lot of challenges within using, can I use polyfills, etc., technical debts adding up, are familiar topics. As a matter of fact, in recent sites that we are launching, we are just checking against the baseline feature set. Okay, can we finally, for example, drop our JavaScript lazy loading library and just switch to native lazy loading, etc., etc. But I'll first dive to our implementation. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and let's do this one. All right. You should now be able to see my baseline summary page on the most difficult domain name to pronounce for non-Dutch people, I guess. Rechtentegels. I almost wanted to pronounce it in English, but it's rechtentegels.nl. And yeah, once again, this really allowed integrating baseline into RUMvision, allowed me to come up with a system as how I would use it in reality as a developer as well, for example. And we've got a summary dashboard over here, which is showing me new features, not the individual features yet, but a summary of the features that were added to baseline 2025, 2024, etc. And how many of the visitors of this very website are already supporting those features. Well, not a lot of them, because 6 features were introduced as newly available, meaning they're finally available across all major browsers. But the big challenge here is, okay, they are available across all major browsers. So in theory, I could start using them, but maybe my visitors are not there yet, are not up to date with the latest browser version. As a matter of fact, if I would hover over the tooltips, I can see which minimum version is required for my visitors to have to be able to benefit from those new features. And then, based on the data that we already collected over the last month and a month before, etc., RUMvision is able to tell us only 1 feature out of those 6 features are fully supported, based on all the different browsers and browser versions that my visitors of this website is using. If I scroll to the bottom a bit, I can see, for example, that baseline widely available is in fact widely available, as in all visitors are supporting all those features that are part of the widely available status. All right. That's we also have a summary at the right, by the way, and Google is typically writing about them as well. So we are linking to the web dev blog posts directly, and you can see an overview of features that became either newly available, meaning again supported by all major browsers, or newly available or widely available, green, meaning they are already supported for 30 months across all major browsers. And if I go to, let's use again, maybe fetch priority could be an example, which is another challenge. I talked about lazy loading and finally being able to ditch our lazy loading JavaScript library, like lazy sizes, or plazy is another JavaScript library. But this one is a bit more nuanced, as in, based on the percentage that I'm seeing, 96.8, you could consider loading attributes as progressive enhancement. But it would mean that if I start ditching my JavaScript library, then 3.2% of my visitors would end up downloading all images at the same time, for example. So Another example is AVIF images. I could first go to WebP maybe. WebP also has a high, well, as a matter of fact, 100% support rate, which makes sense because if I would click on WebP and check, for example, the timeline, then I'm able to see that WebP is around for a while already. And all my visitors, both on mobile devices and desktop devices, are already supporting WebP for a very long time. But when it comes to AVIF images, here we go. Then the timeline looks a little bit different. For example, if I would scroll to the bottom, let's hope so. Yeah, I can see that it was only since April 2024 that Safari browsers on mobile, on desktop, Safari on desktop, and started to fully support AVIF images. So in this case, it's a safe bet to maybe even stop using a fallback. But for another site with another audience in another region, because we have seen differences per region already, it might not be a safe bet to fully remove WebP images and fully go with AVIF images, for example. So this can be, will be different per site. And that's where baseline is a very good simplified start to tell, okay, should we already start using this web feature? And if it's widely available, it basically means, again, you should be fully safe to use it today and not using any fallbacks anymore. But sometimes, and I'm talking for myself as a developer, sometimes there's a feature that isn't widely available yet, but maybe I already want to use it today. For example, view transitions, content visibility, or fetch priority. And I think fetch priority is a very good example because although it doesn't come with full support, let's zoom in. So although it doesn't come with full support because Safari was a bit later to join the club, and then it takes typically way longer than Chromium browsers to get users there, as in users using the latest version. It takes a bit longer. So you might now draw the conclusion, okay, maybe I should not use fetch priority, but I think and believe fetch priority is a perfect example of progressive enhancement because there wasn't any JavaScript equivalent to achieve the same. So using fetch priority today doesn't mean you have to remove or should decide to remove any JavaScript, but you also won't end up breaking anything in those browsers that do not support fetch priority. So yeah, well, again, this is a perfect example of progressive enhancement. So as a developer, you might still want to make tailored decisions maybe. And well, RUMdata is then there to help you, to show you if it's either safe to use this feature already or dive into additional documentations and maybe based on this additional documentation, read a bit more about all those features out there. So while baseline tries to simplify decision-making, you can still dive in and dive into details like you were used to do maybe when still using Can I Use? And I think a fun fact, but maybe you're able to grab me on this one, Tony. I think that even Can I Use is going to switch to baseline data. Is that correct?
That is something I believe they would like to do, but there's still some stuff to be ironed out, especially around they include stats on different browsers, and they have downstream data for they have user curated downstream data for like UC browser and QQ browser and things like that. So we're working on. I think that would be a great way for Can I Use to work. I think it would mean a lot less pressure on one person who maintains that because he's a Herculean effort, but if it's something that's got a large community working on it, like web features, that's even better.
Yeah.
You do get baseline statuses in Can I Use already for stuff where we've got a thing for like the headline group features.
Yep.
And yeah, it's definitely something that's being looked at as a better way of data, because at the moment it really is very piecemeal, especially for the stuff that's downstream of the major browsers.
Yeah, we also ended up using, showing those little batches, using there's a baseline component that you can use. which adds a bit of JavaScript to your website as well. So I have to admit that we went a different route and decided to use the web status.dev API to let's share my screen one more time and show badges on our public pages. So I have to show this one. There we go. Like these. So that's also convenience. Instead of embedding a can I use widget, which is typically very overwhelming, we just show very simplistic badges on our blog post, for example, where we discuss any specific feature, etc. All right.
Oh, great.
Handing it back to you.
Thank you. So, thank you for asking questions in the chat. I love to see it. Good. Well, I'm going to show you now some tooling, some places where you can find information about baseline, but B, you can actually add a baseline to the so firstly, we've talked a little bit about documentation already. This is a screenshot from MDN, subgrid, CSS subgrid. That's a newly available feature as of September last year. That will show you widely available if a feature's been around for been interoperable across the 4 browsers for 2.5 years. And it will show you the angry orange widely available, limited availability across features not yet in base. That data comes from web features. We have web features repository has YAML files that map the key that web features, the groupings that web features uses to MDN compat keys. So that is how we use this. Likewise, can I use where there's a mapping available? You can see there is a baseline widely available tag for CSS containment. You still get the very full featured browser breakout below. And it's got just at the bottom, you can see there's a footnote showing you when it became, I believe that's newly available. Yes, 2022. Yes, so it's basically every web developer refers to one of those 2 sites, if not both of them, on an almost daily basis. So hopefully it will help you if you're starting to investigate new features. We've just been talking about this in the chat. There is also something called Web Platform Dashboard at webstatus.dev. Erwin's just mentioned it as well. This is a list basically of every web feature contained in the web features in the web features repository. With the baseline status, which browsers support it, if it's limited availability, where we've got data from web page test, that's also included. You can click through on any of these features and you'll see if we've got the information available. The web page test pass rates, the usage counters where we've got them, Chromium usage counters. So you can see kind of percentage of sites on the web are using these features. We've added quick searches on the left-hand side for the different baseline years going back to 2020. Most of the conversations I've had even with very large organizations with users on older devices, most of them doesn't sound like they're going to go back any further than 2020 in terms of set threshold. They're not using widely available. You can also get top CSS and HTML interop issues as well. So that is a very handy dashboard for saying, if you want to say, right, what became available in the year that I've just chosen to use in my system, there it is. There's loads of different filters that you can use in that search bar. You can filter by the status, you can filter by the name of the feature, you can filter by the group, so you can filter to like HTML, CSS, JS, that kind of thing. So you've gone into RUMvision, you've deployed the tag, you've figured out which baseline target you want to use. How do you get that into your authoring tools? How do you get that to your linter or your build tool, whatever it might be? The vast majority of tools that people use in code authoring rely on Browserslist. Browserslist is a module that can take queries, Chrome greater than or equal to such and such, or last 2 versions, or it can take data from stat counter if you want to use stat counter data to give you, greater than X%, something like that. So what we want is for Browserslist to be able to pass the minimum browser versions that it generates based on those queries through to other tools. With lots of other tools that use it. These are just, plugins. Some of these are direct support, like in also Prefix with Babel, and Webpack. And some of them are bridging tools, shim tools, effectively, that bridge the gap between, for example, PostCSS or ESLint style. As well, I think you can do. There's more. So this tool Browserslist config baseline, it's very simple to use. You install the package in your repository, in your npm package, and then you just change your Browserslist config to extends Browserslist config baseline. Default, it's going to get you widely available, just the core browser set. But we've got a few other options in there. There's some extra things you can do. You can add / with downstream. That will include all of the downstream Chromium browsers that are listed in MDN browser compat data. So that's Opera, Sampling Internet, Android WebView, iOS WebView. I think what else is in that list? I think those are the critical ones that people really need to support. But we've also done some work on parsing user agents for browsers that are particularly popular outside of Europe and the Americas. So Yandex browser, which is very popular in Russia, and UC and QQ browsers, Android, which are very, very popular in China. Hundreds of millions of users of each of those. That's a best effort thing. We can't promise that data is totally accurate, but as far as we can tell, those browser vendors don't publish regularly or in a kind of data consuming way their from Chromium to whichever version of their browsers they. If they do, and you know where that exists, please file an issue on the repository for this. I'm the maintainer for this plugin. Myself and an independent developer called Alexander. We'd love to know if there's a more deterministic version of that data. We are trying to reach out to those developers through my team in April. So far, not had a lot of luck contacting them. The other thing that you can do is add a year to the end. So either immediately after the end of that extend statement, or after downstream, you can add any year back to 2016, which is when baseline first. That's when Edge was first launched, and that's when we first talk about baseline as an actual standard. You can tack that onto the end, and it can be consumed by other tools. This generates those lists dynamically. So if you're using widely available and the minimum browsers that support widely available have more recent, because new features have baseline. That's okay. Do that every time you run it. It will automatically reflect what that is. There's also some extra options that you can add in your package JSON if you just add a Browserslist basic object. The one I've included here is log console, because to see which minimum browsers you're targeting, especially if you're using widely available, it's good to know which ones you're targeting. We have got a request to build a page that at any given time lists which minimum browsers support baseline widely available. I would like to build that. I'm also maintaining another tool and having sessions with 15 other businesses about supporting baseline. So it's I will do it when I can. Let's put it that way. There are other options you can use there as well. So you can pick a baseline year in that object. You can configure widely available on a specific date. If you're doing version releases, there's already the Angular team working on baseline as their minimum supported browser set and kind of their feature guidance. So they will be using widely available on the day of release for each major version in their CLI, which is really exciting. I can talk about that now because they're doing it in their public repositories. It's not it's a little hush hush. Yeah, so those are things you could do with browsers. Basically, in terms of what that looks like, in terms of having linting appear in your editor or in your CI workflows or in your build workflow, wherever it might be that you process. ESLint have just recently launched a CSS parser. And that CSS parser has direct support for basically widely available, newly available feature sets. So as an example here, you can see we set rule CSS use baseline to give an error for anything that was not available, not baseline newly available by the end of 2020. Similarly, there is a plugin for ESLint called HTML ESLint that will lint your HTML. And in much the same way, you can say that they've used the exact same syntax as the ESLint CSS parser has done. And you can get that native support, and it will, if you start using elements that are not supported by whichever version of baseline you're targeting, it will tell you off. It will give you an angry red error or a slightly less angry yellow error. You figure. And then, of course, if you want to lint other stuff that ESLint can handle, like JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever it might be, you can use this ES plugin Compat that will consume your Browserslist configuration that you configured with Browserslist config baseline, and will give you linting errors for CSS, for JavaScript, other variants of JavaScript. So this is what it looks like when you run that. Set up in this particular example, I've set up Browserslist config baseline to use baseline 2020. Those are the minimum browser versions that are compatible with that are being passed to Browserslist, and we're getting errors for the search element that I've used in an HTML page, which was not widely available, not newly available at that point. I found a CSS template file with lots of shiny new features like absolute and has and device posture. Those are not supported by 2020. And I chucked a big int64 array into a JavaScript file. Safari 14 does not like it. So you would either need to find a different way to do that or update your basic configuration. Browserslist is also supported natively in several popular packages. Babel, for example, Babel and both work very well with Browserslist. You can see here that the difference this makes if you use Babel's preset env configuration. This is a test JS file that has lots of modern JS syntax, pointer functions and classes and things like that. Classes. And when you output that, you get a 13K file. Whereas if you target baseline 2020, which is fairly conservative, that's 5 years ago of newly available features, that gets you down to 1.5K of package code. So it really is worth looking at kind of what you're currently targeting as a minimum and where you can move to, because there's probably some big opportunities to make a leap forward. Even if you're only moving forward a year or two, the polyfills you may drop. There's no polyfilling involved in this. This is literally just syntax transformation. But the polyfills you might drop in the process could save you even more data. Some packages prefer an ES build string rather than a Browserslist config. Vite, for example, I'm testing, and this is an example of Vite config. Good news is that somebody clever and community-minded has built a package called Browserslist that ES build will consume a Browserslist config into an ES build string. So running this, that works immediately in Vite. You'll see changes to your package size and polyfills. Vite doesn't polyfills, but you'll see changes to it. And lastly, coming soon, my teammate Rick from our DevRel team has been working with the Microsoft VS Code team on the CSS language service for VS Code, and has built these hover cards for CSS features. So you can hover over, once you turn this on, you can hover over any CSS feature and tell you what the baseline status is. It became baseline, i.e. available, which is really exciting. Something that's very, very tangible and usable in your day-to-day operations. We have had a conversation about being able to set target year perhaps in your VS Code settings so that it can give you some kind of warning, but I'm not sure how that will move forward. I don't know the details of how these VS Code cards work. Rick is certainly looking into it. So that's all of the tooling that I have available. I've been able to build little demos of so far. We've got more coming down the line. We're planning to build a bunch of different demos of the things that do support both. So yeah, we'd like to open up for Q&A, questions. I put them in the chat. This is not a video call, it's a stream. But pop them in the chat. If you've got questions, I'll be happy to answer them or take them back to the W3C WebDX group for consideration.
Admittedly, it's all quite, well, first of all, technical and also quite nerdy, but also, as Jordi is mentioning as well, all quite cool what is, well, possible with just the baseline data. So that's, and it's quite cool as well that it's open source, as in everyone can use it and can make toolings around it as well, which before was quite hard with just can I use.
Absolutely. Not just that, but the repositories, its data is held, but we will take edits from anyone. Well, obviously they have to be code that makes sense, but anyone can contribute on these, anyone can make a pull request.
Yep.
Neil, who's the maintainer, Patrick and Francois, who are the two leads for the W3C community group, will take a look and I consider those options. Yeah, it's a very, very friendly team. If you are interested in coming and seeing what kind of conversations we're having, anyone can join a W3C community group. It's not like a working group where you have to be nominated and go through a big approval process. Anyone can join and come to those meetings to discuss stuff and ask questions, make suggestions. So,
do you have, are there regular meetings or just whenever a bigger discussions need to take place?
Every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Every 2 weeks. Yeah. And there's always something to talk about because there's always new stuff becoming widely available and newly available. There's always, especially now, it's a very time we're doing a lot of tooling work and we're having conversations with lots of different tools providers and analytics providers. And I'm specific to my partners' businesses that I work with, adopting baseline as part of their workflows. So I think we're going to have a lot of cool stories to tell in the next 6 months or so about what it looks like to make baseline part of your decision-making process and part of your tool.
Yeah. And quite on top of things as well, as in recently fetch later was added, and I think compression dictionaries might be part of baseline already.
That's a good question.
Well, I know that Barry created compression dictionaries, but I'm not sure if it was already part of the final build. I don't know, but should be there soon anyway. Otherwise,
yeah, Barry is a machine in all respects.
Yeah,
highly productive individual. Yes, that is a good question, Carleen. I wish I had more time to think about the actual features. Because at the moment, most of what I'm doing is building the tools that let other people think about the features. No, Barry doesn't sleep. Either that or he's got clones. He and some of you probably know my teammate Gilberto, who also we're fairly certain has a couple of tanks in the basement of his apartment, just growing more Jill clones. Yeah, I wish I had that level of productivity. I'm just looking at release for baseline recently in the web features. So screen weight lock is baseline newly available, which is such a handy thing if you're making stuff, if you're making a news site or a site that has game data, something like that. Screen weight lock is such a handy tool to have because it means that users don't constantly keep unlocking their phone. What else have we got here? Yes, discouraged. That's because this question may come up, and I know people are always interested to know, how do we talk about features that have been deprecated? Terminology we use there is discouraged because there are older browsers out there that might still support them. It's not going to break for everyone. These things will see diminishing returns and progressively worse. You think about unload handlers, for example. Kind of trying to get rid of for years. Things like that, they're described as discouraged. That's a status that will show up in the web features repository. If you are looking for that. Yeah.
All right. No more questions, it seems. But otherwise, we'd love to see what status of deaf link from consumer articles. Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Baseline. It may not be on that top page. It may be there may be an article about it, about the dashboard. But I will bring that up with Rachel, because her and Jeremy Wagner, who you may have heard of before, who's one of our technical writers, the two of them own all the Baseline content, and we're creating lots of new stuff because, as I'm sure you all know, we've got I/O next month, so everyone here is really stressed because that's the beginning of Q2 every year is a little bit of a flurry of activity. But yes, I'll bring that up. Thank you.
Your last moment for any questions, I would say. Baseline, web development, page speed questions.
Don't do that. Baseline Ventures is what that links to, which is some kind of, I don't know what this is. I'm not going to say what it looks like, but big 3D triangle. Yeah, I think it's a VC group or something like that. Interesting.
Maybe in the future. All right.
Maybe in the future.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, Tony, and the explanation and elaboration on Baseline initiative.
Yes, and thank you for building such a excellent tool for people to actually make the right decisions. I want to make it clear, RUMvision are the first to market with this. We're having other conversations with folks about doing this in other analytics and RUM tools, but right now the easiest way to figure out what baseline version you should be targeting and what features are available and not available is through RUMvision. So it's very, very cool, and you guys have been great collaborating.
It was also quite cool to work on this, by the way.
Yeah.
And again, the fact that the data was publicly available and was well set up also helped with our integration as well.
Absolutely. Great.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Thanks all for attending, and see you around. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.